when you see the crime scene pictures, it's very disconcerting because there are cute little Christmas tree and blood.
It's so ugly, it's even hard just to describe.
They say money is the root of all evil, and for the Wamsley family, that dark saying turned into a haunting reality. On a chilling December night in 2003, a quiet but unsettling 911 call came in. Although there was silence on the line, the police knew they had to act, and what they discovered was beyond terrifying: a bloody crime scene and 2 lives brutally taken. While we've all heard tragic cases of seemingly happy families torn apart by violence from within, it's always shocking when it happens close to home, and this case is no exception. The 2 victims, Rick and Susanna Wamsley, seemed to be living the dream, just like your average couple with a perfect life. Rick was a well-loved local accountant, and his cheerful wife, Susie, had everything anyone could wish for. But Rick and Susie weren't always a perfect match. In fact, they first crossed paths in high school back in Oklahoma during the 1970s. They weren't exactly the typical high school sweethearts either, just classmates who noticed each other. But years later, while Rick was studying at Oklahoma State University and Susie at a Christian college, their paths crossed again. What started as a rekindled friendship soon turned into a deep and serious romance. The couple decided they were in it for the long haul: marriage, kids, and growing old together. In 1978, they welcomed their daughter, Sarah, and 6 years later, their son, Andrew. Rick, now a certified accountant, had a steady career in the oil and gas industry. Over the years, the Wamsleys moved around a lot, but eventually they settled in Fort Worth, Texas, which is a big city with a small-town vibe. Rick opened his own accounting practice from home, bringing in a solid income. By 2003, the family was living in a beautiful upscale neighborhood in Mansfield, just outside of Fort Worth. Sarah, their daughter, was now 25 and had her own family, while Andrew, who was 19 at the time, had just graduated high school. He was attending college and working part-time at a mini golf course. Anyone who knew the Wamsleys saw them as the picture of happiness, and they had every reason to celebrate. In July of 2003, they threw a big bash for their 25th wedding anniversary. Then, in December, they were preparing for another family celebration, which is Christmas. Susie, known for her perfectionism, spent hours decorating their home, picking out the perfect gifts and transforming everything into a scene straight out of a holiday card. The house was draped with garlands and Christmas figurines. A huge tree stood proudly in the living room, and gifts piled up underneath, wrapped with love and excitement.
Susanna was one of these women who's still beautiful, into middle age. Just this naturally beautiful redhead. She was a homemaker who always knew exactly the right thing to do.
But what should have been a joyful, magical time quickly spiraled into a nightmare. A shocking 911 call sent emergency responders and crime scene investigators racing to the Wamsley family's quiet neighborhood in Mansfield. It all began on the night of December 11th, 2003, at precisely 11:41 p.m. The call came into the Mansfield 911 dispatch from the Wamsley family home. But instead of a panicked voice on the other end, there was nothing but eerie silence. That haunting stillness screamed that someone was in urgent need of help, but couldn't speak. With no time to waste, the dispatcher immediately sent a patrol car to the house. When the officers arrived, they circled the property, trying to get a response by knocking and ringing the doorbell. But there was no reply. Something was off. As they scanned the house, they noticed the side door leading to the garage was wide open. Without hesitating, they entered. Inside the kitchen, they found the phone off the hook, just sitting carelessly on the table. Moving into the living room, they found Susie Wamsley, the 45-year-old wife and mother, lying cold and lifeless on the couch. Her body was already uncomfortably still. Near the front door, they found her husband Rick, 46, lying in a pool of his own blood. Tragically, it was clear that nothing could be done for him. By 1:17 a.m., paramedics arrived, confirming that both Susie and Rick were dead. The house was immediately sealed off, and the investigation kicked into high gear. The bodies were sent to the forensic lab for a thorough autopsy. And what they uncovered was beyond chilling. Susie had died from a gunshot wound. But that was just the beginning. The real horror came after her death, as she had been stabbed 7 times, likely after her life had already been taken. It seemed Susie had been sitting in the living room, perhaps dozing off while watching TV, when the killer struck. Near the fireplace, investigators found 2 bloody palm prints, which could very well have been left by the murderer. They also found a bullet, a couple of pieces from a blue plastic hair clip, and another piece of plastic on the floor. Rick's fate was no less brutal. Bullet holes in the headboard of the master bedroom's bed showed that the attack had started in the bedroom before spilling out into the hallway. There was no blood in the bedroom, which led investigators to believe Rick had woken up to the sound of gunshots and either tried to escape or put up a fight against the intruder. In his left hand, he clutched a tuft of what seemed to be a hair. This small piece of evidence would go on to play a pivotal role in the investigation. But the horror didn't stop there. Rick had been shot and stabbed at least 11 times in the back. The detectives were determined not to let a single clue slip through their fingers, and they began scouring every room of the Wamsley home. They checked under every rug, flipped every cushion, and even sifted through the smallest fragments of broken furniture for any scrap of evidence. But it was in Rick's hand, still gripping that tuft of hair, and in a broken piece of a blue plastic hair clip found near the living room floor, that they'd find more than they expected. DNA samples were taken from these items, and the rest of the house was checked for fingerprints. Now the big question was, why? Was this a robbery gone horribly wrong? At first it seemed like a plausible theory, but as the detectives dug deeper, something didn't quite add up. They scoured the house for anything that might have been stolen, but found nothing. In fact, they discovered nearly $115,000 in cash sitting untouched in the Wamsley's bedroom. No thief in their right mind would pass up that kind of money, especially during a crime like this. The robbery theory was quickly tossed aside. Still, the search continued, but there was no sign of forced entry, no valuables missing, and no evidence to suggest anything had been taken. So now, the question shifted. Who could have done this to the Wamsley family, especially in the lead up to the holidays when peace and joy should have been filling their home? By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As the investigators spoke to neighbors and friends, they all shared the same story. Rick and Susie were the kind of people who opened their doors to others, who were always there to help someone in need. To the outside world, they were the picture-perfect family, living the American dream. They had a beautiful home, and Rick was a successful accountant, proud of his career and enjoying life's simple pleasures, like tending to his yard and taking his son to Texas Rangers baseball games. Susie was the backbone of the family, a loving housewife who took care of everything, always finding time for her kids, making the house feel warm and welcoming. But as perfect as it all seemed on the outside, there was something much darker lurking beneath the surface. Behind the picture-perfect facade of the Wamsley family's life, things weren't as idyllic as they seemed. There was a whole lot more tension behind closed doors, especially when it came to their 2 children, Sarah and Andrew. It was no secret that Sarah and her parents had a rocky relationship. As a teenager, she was actually kicked out of the house for bad behavior. Definitely not the goody two-shoes image you might expect from a family that looked so perfect on the outside. At 19, Sarah ended up pregnant and entered a pretty unhealthy relationship with her daughter's father, Todd Cleveland. But the drama didn't end there. Sarah and her younger brother, Andrew, didn't exactly win any Sibling of the Year awards. They were constantly bickering, and the tension between them was so thick you could cut it with a knife. According to Sarah's ex-boyfriend, things were even worse than they seemed on the outside. The Wamsley family was suspicious of everyone and, yes, even their friends. Rick and Susie allegedly always thought that people were just pretending to be nice, that everyone had some hidden agenda. Maybe they thought people were just trying to get something out of them, considering how much money they were raking in. And let's talk about that money for a minute. The Wamsleys were living a pretty good life, but oddly enough, as they became more successful, their happiness seemed to shrink. Prosperity wasn't exactly the blessing they thought it would be. It kind of became more of a curse. The more they had, the more it seemed like they lost, especially when it came to their relationships. Rick and Susie did try to set up some rules for their kids, though. One of those rules was that if their children went to college, they'd get financial support. But of course, things didn't go according to plan. Sarah didn't even bother, but Andrew convinced his parents that he was going to fulfill his promise, so they gave him the full support package. They bought him a brand new white Mustang, paid for his insurance, and covered his living expenses. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but there was one big issue. Andrew wasn't holding up his end of the bargain. Andrew, just like his sister Sarah, eventually dropped out of college, never finishing what he had started. This wasn't exactly news to Susie and Rick, and when they found out, they decided it was time to cut him off financially. But in true parental form, they didn't go as far as kicking him out of the house. The tension in the family kept building, but Andrew didn't seem too bothered. Instead, he spent most of his time hanging out with his friends at the local pancake house, a place known for its legendary breakfast spread. It was at this very spot that Andrew was introduced to 19-year-old Chelsea Richardson, a friend of his sister Sarah. Now, flash forward to the early hours of December 12th. Sarah Wamsley was jolted awake by the tragic news that her parents had been found dead. It was 4 o'clock in the morning when she got the devastating call. Meanwhile, Andrew was nowhere to be found. The police had already gone public, asking anyone who had seen his car to report its whereabouts. But as the crime scene was still being processed, something else happened. A white Mustang pulled up to the Wamsley home. It was Andrew, along with his girlfriend Chelsea, who had been spending the past few days at her place. They had been watching the news when the heartbreaking story about the Wamsley family broke. They were in shock, just like everyone else, but their arrival at the scene didn't go unnoticed. The police immediately asked them to follow a service vehicle to the station for questioning. The conversation with Andrew lasted about 45 minutes, but it didn't reveal anything too shocking at first. Andrew hadn't been to his parents' house for several days and hadn't been in touch with them either. Instead, he had been staying at his girlfriend Chelsea's place the entire time. He mentioned some fresh scratches on his hand, but other than that, there wasn't anything suspicious in his story. The police let him go, but before he left the station, they asked him to sign a consent form allowing them to search his car. That's when Andrew made an odd remark. He told the investigators that forensic experts would likely find their mother's blood in the Mustang. According to Andrew, his mother had recently cut her finger and had used his car to drive to the store. His explanation seemed odd, but he stuck to it, suggesting that the blood in the car could be explained by this small accident. Chelsea Richardson's story at the station lined up perfectly with Andrew's. She confirmed that they had spent the last 2 days together and had been inseparable since they started dating the previous fall. During their time together, they'd even spent entire nights in a 24-hour cafe, bonding over a Japanese collectible card game called Master Duel. While Chelsea's family was supportive of the relationship, with her mother welcoming Andrew with open arms, things weren't so rosy on the Wamsley side. Rick and Susie had strong reservations about their son's choice of partner. The Richardsons lived in the working-class outskirts of Fort Worth, far from the million-dollar homes in Mansfield, and Rick and Susie couldn't help but see the stark contrast. Chelsea's background was a world apart from their own, and they had hoped Andrew would choose someone more fitting for their status. And Chelsea's life hadn't been easy. A few years prior, she lost her beloved father to a heart attack and her mother had to juggle multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Despite their struggles, the Richardson family was known for their generosity. Chelsea herself was an extrovert, widely liked in school, and her cheerful personality earned her the nickname Bubbles. When her best friend Susana Toledano had a falling out with her own mother, Chelsea opened her home to her, letting Susana stay for months. Now, on the night Andrew's parents died, he, Chelsea, and their friend Susana were all together. But as the investigation deepened, Sarah Wamsley, Andrew's sister, had her suspicions. She told the police that her daughter's father, Todd Cleveland, might be involved in her parents' death. Apparently, Sarah and Todd had been arguing about custody, and she had even threatened to call Child Protective Services. Just a day after making that threat, and a month before the tragedy, another unsettling incident took place. In early November, Sarah was driving home with her parents after a horseback riding lesson. They were passing through a nearby town when suddenly, the Jeep they were in jolted. Rick, her father, initially thought a large stone had hit the car, but when he stopped to check, they were shocked to discover it wasn't a stone. It was a bullet hole. Confused and scared, Susie, Sarah's mother, quickly made 2 phone calls. The first was to her son Andrew, not the police. She thought the car following them was a white Mustang, and she assumed it was Andrew driving behind them. The second call was to the police, where she reported the incident. Sarah recalled thinking that Todd Cleveland might have been behind the shooting, but found herself wondering why her mother had called Andrew first instead of the police. The timing of these events made investigators sit up and take notice. The Wamsleys had a lot of money at stake. Sarah and Andrew stood to inherit a $1 million insurance policy from their father, plus their family home was valued at about $1,650,000. On top of that, there was over $100,000 in cash, plus other assets. This financial windfall, coupled with the family's tense relationships, made both Sarah and Andrew prime suspects in the eyes of the investigators. But DNA analysis and fingerprinting at the crime scene didn't match either of them. Still, this didn't end Sarah's suspicions. She filed a petition to block Andrew from inheriting anything, convinced that he was somehow responsible for their parents' deaths. She even feared that he might try to eliminate her too. Despite forensic evidence of blood on the back seat and headrests of Andrew's Mustang, the car had been cleaned so thoroughly that experts couldn't extract any viable DNA samples. It was a dead end. No one could even confirm whose blood was found in the car. Months passed, and the investigation seemed to be going nowhere. Because of this, the district attorney called for a grand jury to help move things forward. They began issuing subpoenas to people connected to the Wamsleys, starting with Andrew and Sarah's alibis. At first, Andrew's alibi seemed solid. His girlfriend, Chelsea, and her best friend, Susana Toledano, both testified that Andrew had been with them that night, providing a strong alibi for him. They confirmed that they had all been together, making it appear as though Andrew couldn't have been involved in the tragedy. To further cooperate with the investigation, Susana even agreed to provide a DNA sample, which seemed to add another layer of credibility to their story. But this move would turn out to be incredibly important. After Susana provided her DNA, it was discovered that her genetic profile matched a strand of hair found in Rick's hand and DNA from a broken hair clip at the crime scene. This shocking revelation put her directly in the spotlight, casting doubt on her initial testimony and suddenly turning the investigation in an unexpected direction. So, as you'd expect, Susana was arrested on suspicion of killing the Wamsley couple and was potentially facing the death penalty. Realizing how serious the situation was, she began to talk.
So she plea bargains out, says, yeah, I'm guilty, and starts spilling this story of these lost, angry kids who convinced her to help them kill the Wamsleys, who told her that they would give her a lot of money.
At first, she told the police a story that seemed to check out. She claimed that on the night of the crime, she was walking with a friend, a 25-year-old man named Hilario Cardenas. According to Susana, Hilario had a gun and needed money, so he went into the Wamsley house alone, leaving her outside. She said she heard gunshots and ran to the scene, but not before her hair was left behind in the house. Rick Wamsley, she claimed, begged her to stop the attack, but since she wasn't really involved, she couldn't do anything to stop it. But who was Hilario Cardenas? It turned out that Hilario worked as a night manager at a local restaurant where Susanna, Chelsea, and Andrew often hung out. He had a young daughter to take care of and was desperately in need of money. After meeting Andrew, Hilario learned about the Wamsley family's wealth, which set off alarm bells for investigators. During questioning, Hilario denied being involved in the attack, but he did admit to acquiring a gun for $200 at Andrew's request. Apparently, Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna wanted to practice target shooting at a friend's farm. The investigation dug deeper, starting with the property owner where the teens allegedly practiced their shooting. The owner was actually a friend of Chelsea's mother, and confirmed that the group had come to her 3-acre property a few months before the tragedy to practice shooting at a small pond. However, she had never heard of Hilario before, which raised a few eyebrows. But Hilario passed a lie detector test, which helped him gain the police's trust. The investigation continued, and forensic experts drained the pond on the farm to collect bullets from the bottom. To everyone's shock, the bullets from the pond matched the ones found at the Wamsley house. This made it clear that Susanna's original story about Hilario being the attacker was falling apart. Still, she was given another chance to come clean. This time, her story changed, and it became far more intricate, with even more shocking revelations about what had really happened that night. According to Susanna's new account, the 3 teenagers spent countless sleepless nights at a local cafe, huddled together, plotting their sinister plans. They had big dreams, dreams of money, freedom, and a life of luxury. They had carefully calculated that after Rick and Susie's deaths, Andrew would inherit a fortune, over $1 million. This sum would be enough to set them up for life. No more worrying about bills, no more working dead-end jobs, just a life of ease and comfort. In their minds, it was a flawless plan. Susanna, who hated her low-paying job, saw this as her ticket to freedom as well. She thought she could finally quit, buy herself a new car, and live the life she always wanted. But to make their twisted vision a reality, they needed a weapon. So they convinced Hilario Cardenas, the night manager at a local cafe, to buy them a gun. After practicing their shooting at a friend's farm, the teenagers concluded that Susanna was the most accurate shooter among them. The first plan was simple: shoot at Rick's Jeep's gas tank. If it worked, they'd wipe out everyone standing in the way of their big dream, Rick, Susie, and even Sarah, all in one deadly shot. They were so sure it was foolproof because just picture it: the explosion, the chaos, the money rolling in. But things didn't go as planned. When Susanna, riding in Andrew's white Mustang, tried to line up the shot behind the Jeep, she missed. The bullet sailed off harmlessly, and their perfect plan crumbled in an instant. They had to come up with something else, fast. So they moved on to Plan B, which was breaking into the Wamsley house under the cover of darkness. The teens thought it would look like a simple robbery, but things were starting to get messy, and when their first idea didn't work, Chelsea snapped. She was beyond frustrated. She and Andrew were pushing Susanna, pressuring her to do what they started. They all agreed to give it another shot. This time, they helped Susanna sneak into the Wamsley home. They hid her in the closet of Andrew's bedroom, the gun in her hands, ready to go. The couple, Andrew and Chelsea, kept urging her to move fast so that they could all head back to their normal lives like nothing ever happened. But Susanna wasn't ready. She sat there in that closet, waiting and waiting for hours. She couldn't do it. She couldn't bring herself to shoot Andrew's parents. But as the morning of December 11th, 2003, crept closer, they decided to try again. This time, there was no turning back. Susanna's confession was a gut-wrenching story. She admitted that when they broke into the Wamsley house that night, she was the one holding the gun, while Andrew and Chelsea had knives. It was Susanna who first came across Susie Wamsley, the woman of the house, sitting on the couch. Without a second thought, Susanna shot her. But the plan wasn't over yet. Andrew led Susanna into the master bedroom where Rick was, and she aimed the gun at him. The shot missed, hitting the headboard instead and waking Rick up. That's when the chaos broke out in an instant. Rick fought back, lunging at them in a desperate attempt to defend himself. In the struggle, Andrew grabbed the gun from Susanna's hands and shoved a knife into her grip. He told her to check on Susie Wamsley, while he and Chelsea stayed behind to figure out what to do with Rick. As Susanna moved through the house, she saw Rick on his knees, looking up at Chelsea, asking in disbelief, "Why?" And Chelsea's response was simple, "Because I'm pregnant." Rick tried to reason with them, telling them he could help, but before he could say anything else, a shot rang out. It was over. Rick's life ended at that moment, and Susanna never found out who actually pulled the trigger. What she knew was that the teenagers finished what they started, leaving Rick to die before running off. But Susanna wasn't completely in the clear. After all, she had been part of it. So, in exchange for her testimony against Chelsea and Andrew, Susanna was able to avoid the same fate. It was a tough pill to swallow for the Wamsley family's friends, especially those who had watched Andrew grow up with Rick and Susie. They couldn't believe that Andrew, raised by Rick, could be the one to betray him like this. They prayed for Andrew's release, insisting that he couldn't have been the one to do something so terrible. But no, Susanna's account really turned everything around. Without her, this case might have stayed a big mystery for much longer. She was the one who told the whole truth about what went down that night, and it ended up sealing the fate of both Chelsea and Andrew. Her testimony helped authorities piece together the twisted plot, and once the facts were laid out, there was no going back for the teens. Justice, although delayed, was finally served. Now things got really messy for Chelsea once she was in prison. According to her cellmate and a few other informants, Chelsea wasn't exactly keeping quiet about her role in the murders. She actually bragged about it, telling people how she was involved and even trying to get them to back her story up. Chelsea's image, once that of a cheerful high school student, was now shattered. The prosecution argued that she wasn't just an innocent bystander in this whole mess, she was the mastermind. They said she convinced Andrew that he'd be better off without his parents and manipulated Susanna into doing the dirty work. To make matters worse, the jury got to see a note Chelsea wrote to Susanna while she was in custody. In the note, Chelsea asked Susanna to place the blame on Hilario Cardenas, the night manager who helped them get the gun. She also claimed she was pregnant with Andrew's baby and guilt-tripped Susanna into lying to the cops so that their future child could have a better life. The note ended with a chilling line, "Friends forever." Yeah, right. When Susanna was on the stand, she admitted she didn't buy Chelsea's whole pregnancy story, but she had to be honest. It was her account that tied the teenagers directly to the murders. Even though Susanna had lied a few times before, her final version of events was the turning point. That's when the whole thing started to unravel for Chelsea and Andrew. The jury didn't waste much time. They found Chelsea guilty of capital murder in less than 4 hours. Then, just 2 hours after that, they came to a unanimous decision. Chelsea was a serious threat to society, and she was sentenced to death by lethal injection.
In Chelsea's case, they were able to show that Chelsea had more of an active role, more of a planning role. She was more persistent than Andrew.
But Andrew? His defense team had a different plan. They argued that he had dissociative personality disorder, making him less likely to commit violent acts in the future. They painted Andrew as a victim of emotional and physical abuse, claiming that's what drove him to kill. However, the jury didn't buy it. They sentenced Andrew to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 2044. Hilario Cardenas, the night manager who helped them get the gun but didn't actually do the killing, wasn't off the hook either. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit felony murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. He'll be eligible for parole after serving a third of his sentence, which started in 2023. As for Chelsea, her legal team didn't give up. After more than 10 years on death row in Texas, they argued that Susanna's testimony would have prevented the murders, making her the real mastermind behind everything. In 2012, Chelsea's death sentence was commuted to life in prison, and she's still serving time today. Susanna, however, is still facing the consequences of her actions. She's currently incarcerated and won't be eligible for parole until 2034. It's been a long, twisted journey for all involved, and while the teens' lives have been completely changed, the Wamsley family's friends and loved ones are still left picking up the pieces from that horrible night. What's also really sad about this whole case is that it all unfolded because these teens were blinded by the lure of money. It's hard to believe that Andrew, who was given so much by his parents, could turn around and claim they were abusive. That part of the story doesn't even seem to add up. In reality, Andrew had been given a beautiful life, full of opportunities, only for him to destroy it all. And then there's Sarah Wamsley, the surviving sister. She's now living in Oklahoma with her paternal grandparents, and you can imagine that this tragedy will affect her for the rest of her life. While she and her brother Andrew didn't exactly have the best relationship, the impact of what he did is going to stay with her forever. So what do you think? Do you believe Andrew was really subjected to abuse, and that's what pushed him to kill his parents? Or do you think Chelsea was the mastermind behind everything? And on a side note, Susanna's sentence wasn't exactly harsh. Do you think that was fair, considering the role she played? Let me know your thoughts on that too. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.